Hi, everybody. Let's talk about the Illustrator Workspace and how you can set up your files and work with vector graphics. So what you see here is the typical Illustrator Workspace. We've got our artboard, our working space, our palettes, our tools on the sidebar, and a variety of things that you should be familiar with when you've used other Adobe software. So just to start with looking at how things are organized, you've got your toolbar over here on the left, you've got your palettes, your palette bar over on the right, and you've got your main menu screen up along the top where you can get to submenus and other features as you go along. One of the new things to point out, especially on the latest editions of Adobe Illustrator, is this new properties palette over here on the side. Whenever you select a different tool, that properties palette actually changes, and it includes a variety of options and tool add-ons that you might need as you're working. And so watch for that. If you don't see that properties palette, you might be using a different version of Illustrator where they have the control bar along the top. There have been many different iterations. Another thing to point out first is also that the toolbar gets modified depending on which version of Illustrator you're using. Sometimes they use the simplified toolbar or the advanced toolbar. So let's look at that really quick. Under the window menu, you have some options here for changing the way your workspace looks. So if you look at the normal workspace tab, there are some submenus here. And what these are is they're set up so that you can arrange your tools and your palettes in a comfortable way depending on what you're going to be using Illustrator to do. So for example, if I have it on Essentials Classic, this is going to be kind of the default view of the tools. And notice how it's stretched out my tools here on the side into one column, kind of reoriented some of the palettes that were open. Let's go back there to that workspace and try typography. And you'll see it'll pop up commonly used tools that you might be interested in for your typography. So essentially, these workspaces are really handy when you're trying to use the most commonly available palettes and tools, make it easier on yourself. You can make your own if you want. You can create a new workspace based on your preferences. For whatever reason, when I'm working in Illustrator, I tend to have a lot of palettes open, much more than Photoshop or InDesign, and my workspace gets kind of cluttered. So there are a lot of different options, ways you can move things around. Something to pay attention to is when you click and hold on any one of the palettes and you drag the tab, you can move it. You can rearrange them. Just look for the little blue halo that indicates where that palette is moving to, what it's going to be doing. You can detach it from any of these arrangements. You can even expand it so it becomes visible and expanded, whatever you need. Again, there's not enough workspace in a typical Illustrator window to accommodate everything you need to have open. So you have to get used to rearranging your palettes. And if it so happens that you can't find one that you're looking for, that you're missing, you want to go to the window menu and look for the list of available palettes. And there's a lot. So you're going to be looking there for one. Maybe you want the layer palette. Got to click on it, expand it, and you can detach it as needed, or you can drop it in and put it where you need it to go. So big variety, do what you need, make it fit for you. Notice how in the toolbar setting under the window menu, you also have advanced and basic. And this is what I was talking about a little bit earlier, is that sometimes when you load Illustrator for the first time, it goes with basic. Having used Illustrator for many years, I already know the tools I'm looking for, and when they hide them like this, it annoys me. So I always switch the toolbar to advanced because I need to have access to all of them. So that's something to pay attention to. As you look along the top menu bar, you're going to find probably the most common features organized in common places. So the effect menu is kind of like the filter menu in Photoshop, where you have image adjustments and other specialty features. There is a selection menu like Photoshop where any of your selection controls are available to you. Type menu, there's an object menu. There's a lot that you can do with Illustrator in the object menu. Just have to kind of learn that as you go, depending on what you're trying to do with your artwork. And in subsequent videos, we'll kind of go over that and look at different things. And of course, you've got the edit menu and your file menu for saving and changing your preferences and doing things like that. Speaking of preferences, depending on whether you're in a PC or on a Mac, you can find preferences where you can control all of your settings for your tools, your display, and all of the important features of Illustrator are housed under the Preferences dialog box. All right, now let's just talk about moving around the page a little bit. One of the cool things about Illustrator is you're not limited to your workspace size. You know, if you're kind of used to working in Photoshop and even in InDesign a little bit, you're limited to that page size. But Illustrator actually has a quite expansive working space, which means that a lot of times while people are working in Illustrator, what they do, and I'm the same, is that I'll be working on graphics and I'll spread them out inside the file as I'm working on little drawing segments. And maybe I'll make a copy of something and I'll make a modification and I'll leave that off to the side in case I need to use it later. And I do that knowing that the only thing that actually prints, if I were to print this file, is what's housed on the actual artboard, on the page board. So anything else off to the side might be important, but doesn't need to be printable, but it needs to be stored somewhere. So it's kind of thrown into my Illustrator file. So you'll see that people tend to work in a kind of a cluttered manner inside Illustrator because you just have so much extra space. That's one of the great benefits of vector art, is that you've got so much working space inside your file. The file is fairly small, so it doesn't take up a lot of room on your hard drive. It's a very efficient file type, and so you'll find that available to you in your document. Speaking of artboards, this is what I'm talking about. So let's say I want to have multiple pages inside my document. Well, there is an artboard tool here on the toolbar. And basically what it does is it allows you to draw additional pages inside your file. And these are custom sized pages. So I could have an 8.5 by 11 inch page. I could have a 4 by 6 page, whatever I need. And those would show up in printing form as page 1, 2, and 3, or in this case, they're identified as Artboard 1, 2, and 3. So that's one of the additional benefits of Illustrator, is the file type itself is fairly expansive. You can have multiple pages, have multiple layers of graphics in there, kind of self-contained little working folder where you have all the stuff you need. So I'm going to switch back to the selection tool so that Artboard gets shut off. So basically, not to confuse you at this stage, but just to say that you can have more than just one page inside Illustrator. And it's typical to work at actual size, meaning the majority of people are using Illustrator for print or for web or design, some other purpose. And so what you want is to make sure that your artboard matches your ultimate output size. So if you're working for a poster, you want it to be 11 by 17. If you need to make a billboard, it could also go up to a really extreme size, 12 feet by 10 feet. You can do that inside Illustrator. And what's cool is your graphics scale. This is not true in Photoshop. Photoshop file size limits your resolution. You're limited by your resolution in your file size, I mean to say. So images of low quality are limited in the size that they can be printed or used. Vector files, on the other hand, Illustrator files, can be scaled infinitely. So you can have a 2-inch diameter file and blow it up to 20 feet, and it will have the exact same quality. It's one of the benefits of how vector graphics are actually constructed out of mathematical curves and lines. So that's one way to kind of navigate your artboard, is to create additional artboards as additional pages. Now let's look at your view options here. Definitely you want to get used to controls like zoom in and zoom out. So that would be Command plus, or on your PC, Control plus or Control minus, so that you can zoom in, zoom out as necessary. Also, notice if you hold the space bar, you temporarily get the hand tool, which allows you to slide the page as you're working. And so you'll find when you're working, especially on a complex drawing, you have to move in and out, slide back and forth. You have to get really comfortable with moving those tools around inside your view space. So get comfortable with that. Another quick shortcut to get used to is Command 0 or Control 0, which basically resets to the active artboard, resets that artboard in your view screen so that you can grab it as needed. All right, so basically I just wanted to use this little video to kind of orient you to the workspace. I'll have a subsequent video where we talk a little bit about building a graphic from scratch, but hopefully that helps you get started to understand what you're looking at. Just remember that if you don't see a tool you remember, or you don't see a palette you're looking for, take a look at your workspace, or take a look at the list of visible palettes, or even on the toolbar. Remember this: each tool that has a little triangle, a little arrow next to it, indicates that there are additional tools attached to that little tool category. So, for example, if I click and hold with the mouse on the pen tool, you'll see that there are 3 other tools hidden in that little palette box. So depending on which one you need, pay attention to those little indicators so that you can find those tools that happen to be hidden, perhaps. Maybe you used one, switched to another, and if you're looking for that tool you remember, most likely it's hidden there. It's just not the dominant tool. And then last but not least, one more thing to mention about palettes is pay attention to the little control buttons on the edges of your palettes. You've got a little X, which would close it. You've got a little sub-menu item here that allows you to look for additional options. And then you have a collapse arrow here that you collapse it, it turns into a little mini icon. So these are all different little adjustments that are made right there on the palette, and a lot of times people miss them and overlook them as they're working. All right, so again, that's a little wrap up. We'll work on another video later on for more detailed information. See you next time.